Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and let's talk about in this video about the pollination events. What are the advantages, disadvantages of different types of pollinations? From our previous video, as I have said, that there are different types of pollination like self-pollination and cross-pollination, and to ensure that the pollen grains will come and fall on the stigma of the same flower, there are some mechanism through which the flowers can ensure that event. Okay, so there are several flowers which are always remaining closed in nature. So those flowers are considered as cleistogamous flowers. So let us see that to ensure the event of autogamy, there are two types of flowers: cleistogamous flowers, which are always remaining closed, and chasmogamous flowers are there in opposite to the cleistogamous flowers, which are always remaining open. In case of cleistogamous flowers, in case of pansy, in case of oxalis, we can find this type of close in nature. That means the calyx, corolla, every time they will be closed, so that the stamen and stigma, everything will be inside the other flowering parts, right? And there is no need to expose the parts into the environment, as there is no need of extra pollination. There is only the self-pollination event occurring. The pollen grain will fall on the stigma, so no need to expose them in the outside environment. That's why the flowers always remain closed until and unless the fertilization event is happening. And in case of some other flowers where the petals, sepals, everything will remain open, and the anthers and the stigma will be exposed in the outside environment. So that type of flowers are considered as open flower or the chasmogamous flowers. Okay, so here are the different types of pollination events. Now let us look into what are the basically advantage and disadvantage of the self and cross pollination events. In case of self pollination event, as we can see that pollen grains are forming from the within the same flower the pollination is happening, or in the second case within the same plant the pollination is happening. So in both of these cases there is very less chance of getting any kind of genetic variation, which is the most very common disadvantage or very important disadvantage we can say in case of a sexually reproducing plant. Because what is the main motto of sexual reproduction? That is to get some kind of variation, right? If there is no variety coming, there is no variation coming, then we can say that this is very much big disadvantage for the self-pollinating flowers. On the other hand, as there is no variation coming from the outside, because there is least chance of getting any kind of new characteristic inside the existing characteristic, because only all the genes whatever is present in the pollen grain, that will fall on the same flower, same stigma. So there is least chance of combining with some new types of characters which can come from the other outside, okay, outside environment. That's why there is very least chance of getting mixed and to get any kind of genetic variation out of it. And as we cannot get any kind of genetic variation out of it, that's why we can say that what is the common advantage of this type of pollination? That is purity. We can find, if we want to do any kind of genetic experiment or genetic research, then it is very important to get that type of purity, that is pure type of characters we can get, as because there is no mix and match of any kind of outside characters. All right, so these are the advantage and disadvantage of the pollination or self-pollination. Let me write it down here in the this is the advantage. What we can write, like purity is the advantage of the self-pollination event, and disadvantage is least variation. Okay, least variation or genetic variation is almost no genetic variation we can find from here. Okay, so these are the advantage and disadvantage, and whatever is the disadvantage for the self-pollinating flowers is the advantage of the cross-pollination. That means in this case the flowers will have utmost genetic variation. at most genetic variation. That means as the pollination is happening in between the flower of two different plants of the same species, that's why it is very important. It is very easy to get any sort of new characteristic features into the second plant, from where the concept of genetic variation comes. Why the variation is so important? Because on the earth, eventually when the environmental changes will occur, at that time the genetic variation will lead to the existence of the species much more easier. Okay, that is why genetic variation is very important for any of the plant and animal species. So as of now, we have seen that cross pollination is much more advantageous than the self pollination event, as because we are getting genetic variation and the species will be much more prone to be getting existed on the, or we can say that the species can exist on the earthland. Now let us see that how the pollen grains will be transferred from one flower to the other flower of another plant. Because maybe one plant is situating here and the another plant is situating almost from almost for like say for example 10 meters away or 50 meters or 100 meters away from that plant. So how the pollen grain will go and fall on the stigma of that plant? There comes the need of some agents who can carry the pollen grains and who can help in the cross pollination event. So what are those agents called? Those are called as pollinators. Okay, those are called as pollinators, or we can say them as agents of pollination. Now there are basically two types of agents. Some group of agents are considered as biotic and some group of agents are considered as abiotic agents. Okay, so biotic and abiotic agents. In case of abiotic agents, we can find like air, water. These are two different modes through which the pollination can happen. So the flower where the air is present as the pollinating agent, that type of flower is considered as Animophilus flower. There are certain characteristics in the Animophilus flowers. What can be there? In case of Animophilus flowers, the pollen grains must be very much lightweighted so that they can be easily taken away by the air, as well as the stigma must be very much sticky, or stigma must have that type of characteristic features. They must be exposed enough to the air so that they can catch the pollen when they are carrying away by the air current, right? So these two are very important features. Like what did I say just now, that the pollen grains are very lightweight, pollens are lightweight, and in few cases like in case of pinus, we can find the pollen grains are having this type of wing-like structures. The pollen grains are having wing-like structures. This type of pollens we can find in pinus, which is very important because these pinus pollens can cause the air pollution in some places. That is why this type of wing pollens. So this is advantageous for doing the Animophilus kind of pollination. And in case of stigma, the stigma and the female part must be exposed enough to the environment so that they can catch very easily whenever there is any type of pollen grains blowing away with the air. Okay, this is about the characteristic features of the flowers, as well as they don't need to bear any type of color. So basically the flowers are, most of them are colorless in nature. Any kind of odor will not be there. No smells are required, nectars are not required, nectar glands are not required. These are the important characteristic features of the flower where air is the main pollinating agent. In case of some other flower, like in case of aquatic flowers, there is the water which is the pollinating agent, and those are considered as Hydrophilus flowers. Now in case of Hydrophilus flowers, there are also two types of events that can happen. In one event, the flowers can be on the upper level of the water, that is known as epihydrophilus, and when the flowers are submerged inside the water, then they can be considered as the hypohydrophilus pollination or the flower. Okay, so in the water pollinated flowers also, the pollen grains must be produced in enormous number. That means in a lot of number the pollen grains must be produced, so that there is a very much chance of getting rotted or getting lost into the water current. That is why it is very important, as well as there is one extra layering outside the pollen grain in the aquatic plants, that is made up of mucilage. Mucilaginous coating must be there. What is the importance of having mucilage on the outside covering? As because the pollen grains have to float on the water so that it can remain viable for a longer period of time. It will not get rot very easily. That is why having mucilage is a very important characteristic feature of the pollen grain. Okay, as well as the flowers can be of colorful or cannot have any kind of color. There is no such important feature that they have to bear some color in them, right? So these are some important characteristic features of the Animophilus flowers. Except the Animophilus flowers, you can see that there are also biotic agents or biotic pollinators by which the pollination can take place. One is the bird. Okay, one is the bird, the flower where through the birds or with the help of the insects, bees, beetles, the pollination can take place. So where the bird is the pollinating agent, that is considered as the ornithophily, and where the insects are considered as the pollinating agents, those are considered as Entomophilus flowers. So in both of these cases, the flowers must be of very much colorful, as well as the flowers will have the nectary glands so that they can form the nectars to attract the flower, to attract the insects, to attract the birds towards them, so that the pollination event can take place. And as of now, we have seen that cross-pollination is much more advantageous over the self-pollination event. So flowers will always have the tendency to do the cross-pollination event. So they will do some activities so that they can meet the cross-pollination event very successfully. To do all of those activities are considered as outbreeding devices. So about the outbreeding devices I am going to talk in my next video, so keep on watching. And if you found this video helpful, then please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.